program is, of course, the Locke Multicultural and Social Justice Symposium. And attaching Don's name to issues of that kind and the exploration of issues of that kind is, I think, exactly an appropriate kind of testimonial to the man that he was and the kind of life that he lived.
When I had gotten word that Don passed, I was talking to another colleague, Bill Harvey. He said, we need to create a symposium. And I said, I agree.
So we decided that an appropriate thing to do, again, particularly given his trailblazer status as the first African-American faculty member in the School of Education, was to come back to the institution and try to find a way in which we could acknowledge and memorialize the many things that he'd done in that institution.
Once the idea got fleshed out, it was a matter of then figuring out who would be the appropriate symposium speakers. And if you look at the historic records, you see there have been some very high-powered, well-known, nationally known scholars.
This whole embrace of multiculturalism in a way in which we become a more inclusive country. The issues and concerns are just as important now as they were when he raised them as a professor and as an author. So the very fact that we're continuing to have the necessity for these kinds of deliberations, again, I think points out how in some ways ahead of his time he was.
Don was clearly a trailblazer, and I think the symposium is a reminder that historically what's been done is really, really important, but there is still work yet to be done. There are still scholars whose voices are needing to be heard. So I think what the symposium done is it shines a light on the fact that it ain't over. The work is still going.
Hello, and welcome to the 2021 Don C. Locke Multiculturalism and Social Justice Symposium. I am John Lee, the Associate Dean for Faculty and Academic Affairs with the NC State's College of Education. We are honored that so many of you have joined us for this third annual symposium. We're also thankful to have Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings as our keynote speaker, and for her patience and flexibility. We actually had Dr. Ladson-Billings lined up to deliver the symposium's lecture last March and postponed it for a year because of the pandemic. But with everything that has happened since, with the prolonged pandemic, overt racism and white supremacy, and ongoing economic and environmental challenges, her talk comes at an especially opportune time. Before we continue, I do have some sad news to share. In the video you saw about how this symposium came to be, you heard from its two founders, Wynetta Lee and William Harvey. Sadly, the third founder of this symposium, Dr. Lee Stiff, passed away last Friday. Dr. Stiff taught and led our college for 37 years, retiring last summer as a professor emeritus of mathematics education and the Associate Dean for Faculty and Academic Affairs. He was nationally recognized thought leader on equity in mathematics education and had received the 2019 National Council of Teachers of Mathematics Lifetime Achievement Award. Dr. Stiff had previously served as MC of the symposium and was the one who extended the invitation to Dr. Ladson-Billings to speak. His death is profoundly difficult for our college family and an immense loss for the entire field of education, especially for those who champion educational equity. Dr. Stiff impacted countless lives, and we wanted to take a minute to honor him with this video that includes a 15-second moment of silence.
People would say to me, why are you going to be a teacher? And they say, those who can do and those who can't teach. And whenever they would say that, it offended me. And over my career, I have refashioned that statement. Those who can do and those who care teach.
Thank you for joining us in recognizing the life of Dr. Stiff. Before we hear from Dr. Ladson-Billings, there are a few additional people we would like to introduce you to who will share more about the impact of the symposium's namesake and the college's work to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion. First, we have Dr. Don C. Locke's wife, Marjorie P. Locke. Mrs. Locke provided the seed funding for us to start this symposium in 2018. She also started a scholarship that supports students who share many of the same values as she and her husband. Here's Mrs. Locke.
Hello, I'm Marjorie Locke. Thank you for joining us for the Don C. Locke Multiculturalism and Social Justice Symposium. My husband became a champion of multiculturalism and social justice at the beginning of his career, and it continued even beyond after he retired. Don was also a strong supporter of students as they pursued a career in counseling as well as in other areas. This was and is very important to me because it was a real struggle for me to go to college. I am the 8th of 14 children in my family, and my parents were not able to provide any financial assistance for college. I had a small scholarship, but had to work to support myself and pay other college expenses. This is why I have a strong desire to help others in similar situations. It is a real joy for me to meet the recipients of our scholarships, knowing what a difference it creates within the scholarship recipient and the desire to help others. The Marjorie P. Locke and Don C. Locke Symposium Scholarship awards at least one scholarship each year to a promising graduate student who has shown great commitment to advancing multiculturalism and social justice. Today, it is my honor to announce and introduce the 2021 recipient of the scholarship, Brittany Wake. Here's more about Brittany.
Multiculturalism and social justice are foundational to who I am as an individual, as a counselor, and who I hope to be as an educator. I do quite a bit of service to my program in terms of, supporting with developments that we have to become anti-racist and to become a liberated space. I am the president of Chi Sigma Iota, which is the Counseling Honor Society. I serve on a couple of different boards, one of which is on the North Carolina Counseling Association's President's Anti-Racism Task Force. I also do national advocacy, so I do activism as well. So in terms of protesting and writing letters and changing systems that I'm close to, that I'm in close proximity to. A really critical way that this award helps me is it fuels me. Right? This work can be incredibly isolating and exhausting, demoralizing sometimes. And so receiving awards like this, especially from professors and colleagues and whomever else viewed me as worthy enough to receive this award, that gives me the courage to continue. And that's more than I could ask for. Thank you. I appreciate you, and I accept this award with so much gratitude.
Good afternoon. I'm Mary Ann Danowitz, Dean of NC State's College of Education. I want to thank you for joining us, and especially thank you, Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings, for heading this week's symposium at an especially poignant moment in our nation's history. I'd also like to thank Mrs. Locke for your continued support of our college and for our students like Brittany Wake. And wow, what an incredible student Brittany is. Your advocacy, passion, and dedication for equity, social justice, and multiculturalism are a remarkable reflection of Don Locke and a wonderful extension of his legacy. Dr. Locke worked at NC State for 33 years and retired 15 years ago as a professor emeritus. His legacy continues in our college. That's evidenced through this symposium, but also through his mentoring and this college's longstanding efforts to advance equity. In fact, our land-grant mission states that our inquiry and practice reflect a commitment to social justice and the value of diversity in a global society. We are home to leading and emerging scholars in educational equity. Diversity education is infused throughout our degree programs, and we're working fervently to prepare more educators of colors and more culturally responsive educators who work in communities with great needs, but few resources. As we expand our efforts to diversify the education workforce, we've amped up and targeted our development opportunities around equity. And I am thrilled to share with you that because of a generous gift from a Raleigh couple, we are establishing the Darla Buchanan Scholarship to further support educational equity. This new scholarship is named for one of the first Black teachers fired in Topeka, Kansas, due to the brutal and fierce white backlash to school integration in 1954. The scholarship will serve as a powerful reminder of the roots of the teacher diversity gap and of our moral obligation to prepare more educators who are part of the solution in addressing today's challenges that Dr. Ladson-Billings will speak on. For our college, being part of the solution to reduce racism and oppression requires us to be an anti-racist college. That's why last summer we formed a change agent group that is identifying strategies for us to be an anti-racist college and to practice anti-racist education. I invite you to learn more about our efforts to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion on our college's website at ced.ncsu.edu/diversity. As educators, counselors, researchers, and leaders, I believe we have a moral imperative and a unique responsibility to engage in democratic life and to prepare others for active engagement in a diverse democracy. This, we know, is challenging and exhausting, but there's no question, it is our highest calling. We have to do it. As we continue this work, I am grateful and empowered by the reality that we in our College of Education are able to stand on the shoulders of giants and beloved faculty members, Drs. Locke and Stiff. I know that Dr. Lee Stiff would be thrilled and grinning ear to ear that so many partners and peers across NC State, across North Carolina, and the nation joined us for this year's symposium. I also think he would be encouraged that so many of you share our commitment to build a more equitable, inclusive, and supportive system of schools and communities so that every child has the opportunity to thrive. So again, thank you for being with us and for engaging in this important symposium today. Now it is my honor to introduce you to NC State's Chancellor, Randy Woodson. Unfortunately, Chancellor Woodson can't be standing with us at this moment in Poe Hall. However, he has sent these recorded remarks for us today.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Dean Danowitz, for your introduction and for your continued leadership. I'm honored to be part of one of the College of Education's signature events, the Don C. Locke Multiculturalism and Social Justice Symposium, and to have the opportunity to speak to you before you hear from our distinguished speaker, Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings, especially at this pivotal moment in the United States' history, as we work to build a more diverse, inclusive, and supportive communities. As a land-grant institution, NC State has a unique responsibility in this particular work, and a responsibility to increase opportunities for all North Carolinians. The College of Education embodies this land-grant mission through everything we do. Their impact and reach is powerful and expansive. They have research projects, partnerships, and field placements in 92 of North Carolina's 100 counties. U.S. News & World Report ranks the college number 31 in the nation, which is especially impressive when you consider how many graduate colleges of education there are in the United States. And this past fiscal year, the college was awarded over $30 million in external grants, one of the highest amounts among public colleges of education in the nation. Today, the college's faculty, staff, and research associates are now engaging in over 110 funded projects totaling over $92 million. And it's truly inspiring to think about the countless number of children, families, and educators the College of Education impacts across North Carolina and beyond through their work. They are improving reading proficiency, equipping learners with STEM skills, addressing workforce needs, closing technical skills gaps, and preparing equity-minded educators, counselors, and leaders who go on to strengthen our schools, our colleges, and yes, our communities. And they're on the forefront of driving educational change while advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I want to highlight just one initiative that has, I think, exemplifies the college's mission and its long-standing commitment to social justice and valuing diversity in a global community. And that's this symposium. The College of Education started the Don C. Locke Multiculturalism and Social Justice Symposium in 2018 to honor its namesake. I didn't know Dr. Locke personally, but I've heard remarkable things about him and his extraordinary work to advance equity and counseling throughout his life. This symposium is a wonderful and meaningful way to remember him and to continue his legacy. And thank you to all the donors, and especially to Don Locke's wife, Marjorie, for making this symposium possible because of your very generous financial support. And what an honor it is to have the highly esteemed and foremost authority on diverse classrooms, Gloria Ladson-Billings, to headline this year's event. I look forward to learning from you, Dr. Ladson-Billings, as we continue our work at NC State to build a more diverse, equitable, and supportive campus community. I know I will take to heart what Dr. Ladson-Billings shares with us, and I hope you join me in thinking critically about next steps and actions we can take individually and collectively to advance a diverse democracy. Thank you for being here, and have a great evening.
I remember he sent me a picture of him skydiving. I was like, this dude is unreal. But he was courageous. For Dr. Locke, in the area that he focused on, multicultural education and diversity and social justice and those issues, those were not easy topics to talk about. But Dr. Locke talked about.
When he got to the mic, people would stop what they were doing and they said, Don Locke is talking now, we need to listen.
He served as our guide and our conscience as we found our way as individuals and as a profession.
In the classroom, he was a beast. He always pushed you to the next level of thinking. And so that's what I appreciated most about it. And the fact that he never forgot who I was.
He mentored a lot of people.
I recall going through my dissertation journey and my mom was sick and I was emailing him. I'm not sure if I can get it done. And his reply was "finish strong" in all caps.
He was one of the most congenial and caring individuals that I met on my career journey. He and his family would host an annual one-piece chicken dinner. And believe me, it was one of the most awesome family-style celebrations.
He was one of a kind. He's just absolutely one of a kind.
He's the epitome of a change agent, a trailblazer, a pioneer.
And learning that he had passed, I had to pause and I had to think about, professionally, what am I doing that's going to make a difference? What have I done or what will I do that would have made him proud? There's nothing else to say.
Now that you've seen the impact that Don Locke had on countless others, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Patricia Marshall, a professor of multicultural studies within our college. Dr. Marshall will introduce our keynote speaker.
Thank you, Dr. Lee. It is my privilege to participate in this third annual symposium honoring the scholarly legacy of Dr. Don C. Locke. I first met both Don Locke and Lee Stiff here at NC State University on the same day in 1990 when I was interviewing for my faculty position as an assistant professor. Little did I know on that day that both of those incredible men would have such a significant impact on my career. I became familiar with Don's work on multiculturalism and drew upon it in my own scholarship around multicultural teaching concerns. In recent years, I worked with Lee, and in 2019, we co-authored a book with our colleague Val Faulkner, where we explored race, bias, and opportunities in mathematics classrooms. I want to extend my personal thanks to Don's family, his wife Marjorie, and their daughters Tanya and Regina for sponsoring this annual symposium. And now my introduction of our keynote speaker. The word is notorious. For hip hop, there was B.I.G. For US jurisprudence, there was Associate Supreme Court Justice R.B.G. And for the world of education, there is G.L.B. Our distinguished keynote speaker, Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings. I first met Gloria in the mid-1990s when we were both members of the National Council for the Social Studies. She later would ask me to write a chapter for one of her edited books, and I asked her and she accepted to serve as a member of the Expert Advisory Board on a National Science Foundation research project for which I served as PI. Since I met her, there hasn't been a course I have taught in the US or abroad where I have not required students to read the incredibly insightful and unapologetically cutting-edge work of Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings. Gloria Ladson-Billings grew up in West Philadelphia. She earned a bachelor's degree from Morgan State University and a master's degree from the University of Washington. For a decade, she taught in Philadelphia public schools and then later in schools in California. She enrolled in Stanford University, where she earned a Ph.D. in curriculum and teacher education. Dr. Ladson-Billings introduced the world to the concept of culturally relevant pedagogy, and the discourse around minority students and high academic achievement in schools has never been the same. Her book, The The Dream Keepers, Successful Teachers of African American Children, has attained germinal status both within and beyond education circles. Likewise, she is the author of the critically acclaimed Crossing Over to Canaan, The Journey of New Teachers in Diverse Classrooms. Through these and her many other scholarly works, which have been cited tens of thousands of times, she has shaped how we think about teaching and all other facets of education. In addition to her research on culturally relevant pedagogy, Dr. Ladson-Billings broke scholarly ground a second time when she introduced critical race theory to a nice field like education. Through it, she opened the floodgates for exploration and analysis of how race is deliberately exploited and subversively implicated in the perpetuation and entrenchment of inequities and systemic oppression across various education contexts. It is Dr. Ladson-Billings who detailed the contours of what it will take to move education and policy discourses beyond a fixation on the so-called achievement gap and toward critical analyses of the education debt that is owed and must be paid in order for all children and youth in the US schools to realize their promise. Dr. Ladson-Billings was on the faculty of the University of Wisconsin-Madison for 26 years, where she held the Kellner Family Distinguished Chair in Urban Education. Throughout her career in academia, she has received numerous awards, accolades, and honors, including the American Educational Research Association's Palmer O. Johnson Outstanding Research Award and the Distinguished Research and Lifetime Achievement Award. From 2005 to 2006, she served as president of the American Educational Research Association. She holds honorary degrees from universities in the US, Sweden, and Spain. In 2005, she became a member of the National Academy of Education. Dr. Ladson-Billings retired from her faculty position at the University of Wisconsin-Madison in 2018. And she is currently in her third year of a 4-year term as president of the National Academy of Education. All her honors, accolades, and even publications notwithstanding, Dr. Ladson-Billings has said her legacy is the students and all the people who will continue to ask what is right with Black children instead of what is wrong. They are, she says, our best hope for a true democracy. Now, some of my colleagues here at NC State asked, how can we nurture that hope at a time when democracy itself is under assault? A time when our nation is experiencing health, economic, environmental, and social crises that are exacerbating long-standing injustices across race and its intersections with other social axes. This may be the most urgent and important question facing many educators today, and we trust that Dr. Ladson-Billings will weigh in on this question and its related issues. But before she does, I've been asked to address one housekeeping item. We expect to have time for Dr. Ladson-Billings to respond to questions after her talk. So please be thinking of questions you have. You will be asked to submit your questions through the Q&A feature of this forum. We ask that you hold off on submitting your questions until after her talk and until we prompt you to do so. And now, without further ado, it is my personal pleasure to welcome our keynote speaker this afternoon, GLB herself, Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings.
Well, thank you, Dr. Marshall, for that wonderful, wonderful introduction. I am overwhelmed. Now, I don't know if you know it or not, but my students' theme song for me is Notorious B.I.G.'s Hypnotized. So that's the music you should have had playing with me coming on. I'm glad to be here. I recognize I have about 30 minutes to try to lay out some things with you. So I'm going to do my best to stay within that time frame so that we actually do have time for questions. And to do that, I'm going to share my screen. I'm not enamored of presentation slides, but the one thing they do is keep me on task. So I'm going to switch over to sharing the screen. And let's make sure I have up what I need to have up. Let's see. Okie doke. So hold on one second. The beauty of the technology is it never works exactly well. Okay, I'm in good shape now. Found what I wanted. Thank you. So you should be seeing a screen that is the beginning of the PowerPoint. Let me go on to a slideshow view of it and let's get started. Now I've entitled this term, these remarks, This Is Us, Educating Post-COVID, Post-Civic Unrest America. It's a tragedy or an opportunity. And I think that dichotomy is one that I want to play around with a little bit. But first and foremost, I do want to just take a moment of tribute to Professor Lee Stiff. I've known Lee for a very, very long time. And he's the one that taught me about bold, innovative leadership. Remember when he was first working with the Algebra for All initiative in North Carolina, and he said a phrase that I've never forgot, working with young people who were in a general mathematics class. And he said, we went into the project with the notion that nothing we do can hurt these students. That they were receiving such low-level instruction that anything, even the least amount of algebra we gave them, was better than what they were receiving. And that's kind of been a watchword for me. So indeed, I was really horrified on Saturday when I got the news that Lee had passed. I knew he had been sick, but you just never anticipate certain people leaving us. So I am humbled to be doing this because Lee asked me personally last year to do it. Real quick though, I also think it's important that I give you a land acknowledgement. I am from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and it sits on the land of the Ho-Chunk. Their ancestral name is the Dejo. They have been on that property since time immemorial. In 1832, there was a treaty that forced them to cede the territory, and that was followed by decades of ethnic cleansing, where both the federal and state government repeatedly, but unsuccessfully, sought to forcibly remove the Ho-Chunk from Wisconsin. The history of colonization there informs our shared future of collaboration and innovation. And so today, the University of Wisconsin indeed respects the inherent sovereignty of the Ho-Chunk Nation, along with 11 other First Nations of the state of Wisconsin. Dr. Marshall did a great job of telling you who I am, so I'm not going to spend much time here. I am Professor Emerita at UW-Madison. That's sort of a fancy way of saying I'm retired, but I will tell you that I am flunking with retirement. I'm getting an F in retirement. I have no idea how you're supposed to do this. I am the current president of the National Academy of Education. I'm a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, a fellow of the American Educational Research Association, and this year became a fellow of the Hagler Institute at Texas A&M University. So I'm spending several days each week interacting with my colleagues and graduate students there at Texas A&M. But let me give you the context of this talk, because it really is an adaptation from a book I just started to work on. And I'm going to speak to you about 3 of the 7 ideas that I try to develop in the book. And the 3 ideas I want to talk to you about are saving the language of justice, saving justice in the midst of a pandemic, and saving justice via popular culture, also known as how hip hop can save us. Now, that may sound a little out there, but I would ask you to bear with me as I try to go through that notion. And in the talk, you know, the unspeakable thing will be spoken. The notion of protest, riot, insurrection, unrest. We have to talk about that. We don't have a choice. You have 2 juxtaposed pictures that are false equivalencies, that people protesting peacefully on behalf of the lives of Black citizens is not the same as people overtaking a Capitol building to overturn a fairly held election. They're just not the same. And we need to say that aloud. We can't make these false equivalencies saying, oh, well, that's just like, because it's not. So in terms of saving the language of justice, I want to say that while justice is seen as an approach towards being righteous or just or morally right, there are many interpretations of how justice is implemented. So for example, if we looked at Western interpretations of justice, you'll see they're often linked to individual grievances, that I didn't get the justice that was promised to me. It stems from the ancient Greece and from the European philosophies that go something like cogito ergo sum. But those of you who study Western philosophy, you know that is a phrase emanating from René Descartes. I think, therefore I am. That my ability to think brings me into being. And with that notion, one thinks, okay, because I am, I'm entitled to justice. But Eastern interpretations of justice often link to community, not just individuals, and particularly community healing and affirmation. I have a talk that I have to record for the University of Johannesburg, where I'm receiving an honorary degree. Again, hoping to have gone last year, COVID came, and so we're going to do this remotely. But one of the things that's very apparent in that part of the world is the notion of Ubuntu, which is I am because we are. In other words, without the community, I cease to exist. And so if you have that interpretation of justice, that it is a community good, is very different than trying to argue for one individual right. And there's a variety of ways that we consider this notion of justice. Basic justice rarely is connected to the concerns of Black and Brown people. And seeing what we saw in Atlanta last week, I would also say Asian folks of Asian descent. So, and these connections aren't there despite the 14th Amendment. So we say liberty and justice for all, but we still make laws that inhibit people's right to vote, or we still make laws that don't allow them to make a living wage, or we still make laws that keep them from social benefits. We consider justice around the economy. Is $15 an hour too much for someone to make in a highly technological and very expensive society? We consider justice around criminal justice, and we see incredible disparities as to the sentencing and to arrests, and even around juvenile justice. There are disparities that exist. There are questions of environmental justice. The fact that the water is bad in Flint is not everywhere in Flint, but it's in certain communities, or that there's lead paint in certain communities, or that there are toxic dump sites in certain communities. And then finally, social justice, which seems to be the one notion of justice that education has glommed onto. Now, I am actually going to try to trouble that notion, because I'm not convinced that social justice represents what we need to be focused on as educators. And different cultural groups come to the notion of justice from different vantage points, and that has to be part of our conversation. We talk about saving this language of justice. Well, many of the indigenous Americans view justice from the standpoint of sovereignty and treaty rights. So they're not interested in coming to the table if you're not going to talk about their sovereignty, if you're not going to talk about what you already agreed to and encoded in documents such as treaties. Many Latinx Americans view justice from the standpoint of linguistic sovereignty, the ability to speak my language, and la frontera. In other words, I'm back and forth across these border lines. That's a line you guys put in place, but that doesn't mean that that line has the same resonance and meaning for me. A colleague from UCLA, Danny Solorzano, always says, my family did not cross the border. The border crossed my family. And many Asian descent Americans view justice from the standpoint of heterogeneity and or hybridity, because we've used this racialized category, Asian Americans, but we've literally put most of the people in the world in this category, whether we're talking Chinese, Japanese, Filipino, Pacific Islander, Southeast Asian, Indian, Asian. I mean, we have so many people who have been lumped into this category that they've got to be talking about heterogeneity and hybridity when they want to talk about justice. And of course, many African descent and Black Americans view justice from the standpoint of reparation. In other words, what is it that we're going to do to be just to people that we have taken so much away from? And I want to be clear, reparations is not a new idea in America. We certainly have paid them before, and after the Civil War, we paid them to former owners of enslaved people because they had, quote, lost their property. So it isn't a foreign idea. It is an idea that is a very American idea when we talk about justice. Now, I wonder about education's understanding of justice, because I think that as educators, we are being asked to focus on social justice without a commitment to basic justice. There's almost no linkage in our justice language in education between justice and racial inequality. Social justice, in some ways, particularly the way I've seen it implemented in schools and colleges and departments of education, is kind of a justice light. In other words, we don't have to deal with the hard issues of criminal justice. We don't have to deal with the hard issues of environmental or economic justice. And I think it's presented this way to education students as the more palatable, politically correct approach to justice. But I asked this question of my own students. Did Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, do they need social justice? Or do they just need justice? When you think about real life people and the real life circumstances that these people have had to endure, you realize that the notion of social justice is in some ways redundant. These folks need justice. And if you're following the trial right now, you know that they have finally seated a jury. And what's kind of striking to me is that the defendant, a lawyer, has said over and over, this is not a trial about race, but he's asked every person of color on that jury, in that jury pool, what do they think about Black Lives Matter? Well, if it's not about race, why are you asking me this question? So we want to see how justice is played out in this, real-time case. So I think as long as we avoid demanding justice, I didn't say social justice, as long as we avoid demanding justice, we will continue to divorce student achievement from justice. In other words, when we look at when kids are not doing well, we almost never have a conversation about the lack of justice that makes that possible. As long as we avoid demanding justice, I think we will continue to uncouple the discipline policies that we see in schools from justice. We'll also fail to distinguish the injustice in, say, assignment to honors and AP classes. Last week, I actually visited with a high school class in North Carolina. It was Carborough High School. And I actually sent these young people a fairly difficult dense piece of writing that I'd done, the piece that I did on education debt. And they did some videos to send back to me in terms of their response. And then I actually met with them. And then this week they sent me some reaction papers. And over, they said, we now understand why our AP classes look like they look. Because back in 3rd grade, our district started deciding who was gifted and who was to go into what was called the LEAP program. And over and over, these young people said, and there were no Black kids ever selected. So how do we know at 8 years old who are the, quote, gifted ones? But you begin to set up this pattern that suggests these folks are more worthy and these are less worthy. And so by the time you get to high school, yes, those folks that you provided all that enrichment to ought to go into honors or AP, but you have disenfranchised those that you didn't pick in 3rd grade, and they struggle to be a part of AP or honors. As long as we avoid demanding justice, we will not acknowledge the injustice of high school graduation rates. So over and over, I think part of this reclaiming the language requires us to reconnect justice to inequity that we see in our schools. As long as we avoid this demanding justice, we will not acknowledge the inverse relationship between the teacher and student populations. We'll continue to try to manipulate numbers. We'll talk about pipelines, but we will not take it up as a justice issue. In education, social justice, what you will see is a glossing over of opportunity hoarding among many of the collegians and teacher candidates that we have. It's a kind of the rich get richer as you look at who gets into our programs, who gets sponsored through those programs, who ends up being certified and ends up in classrooms. The social justice that we tend to teach in education also fails to acknowledge our misplaced priorities. So we have all this discourse around self-esteem. You know, oh, they just have poor self-esteem. They have low self-esteem. But we have that conversation in the place of an authentic intellectual development of the people we say need to be teachers. We need to really focus on what their intellectual lives are so that as they go into classrooms, they will focus on the intellectual development of the students and not just thinking about having students feel better about themselves. The social justice that we see in education often focuses on talk, not action, or actions unrelated to the lives of students. And I give this example here of saving the rainforest. It's not to say that that's not a worthy thing to do, but I can tell you that I have been in many, many classrooms where kids are working on saving the rainforest. And when I talk to them about, number one, where is the rainforest? They will tell me, I don't really know. And number two, when I say, well, why are you guys doing this? Well, I don't know. This is something she wants to do, referring to the teacher. So not taking action on real things that kids are coping with in their lives. And I think that education social justice often blames others without being accountable. What has been education's role in the injustice that students experience? What it does is it cultivates sympathy rather than what I would call informed empathy. Sympathy is, I feel so bad that this is happening to you. But the unspoken word of sympathy is, but I'm glad it's not happening to me. Informed empathy says, you know what, I know things are tough, but I'm gonna still hold you to a high standard. I know things are tough and let me walk with you through this toughness right now. That's, you know, that the distinction between sympathy and empathy doesn't show up in most of our teacher education programs. The lack of justice, I think, contributes to what I've called the education debt, which is historical, it's economic, it is socio-political, and it is moral. And hopefully in our Q&A, we can talk specifically about these components. But now I want to shift to what I'm calling a tale of 4 pandemics, and it's been articulated somewhat in the conversation before it got started. Everyone knows the novel coronavirus one. More and more of us are being confronted with what I would call the anti-Black racism that is relevant here. And it's a pandemic because it's happening everywhere. When George Floyd was murdered, it was not just people in the US who reached out to me. I got emails and calls from colleagues in the UK saying, you know what, we have the same foolishness going on. I got calls and emails from colleagues in France who said, yeah, we're doing the same stuff. In Toronto, in Canada, we're doing this. In Brazil, in New Zealand. So it is pandemic. The other one that I think is on the horizon is economic collapse. We did see the Congress invest some money to try to shore up the economy. But the truth of the matter is it's too late for a lot of people. More than 2 million women have left the workforce. So much so that economists are calling it not a recession, but a she-cession, because women have had to come home and be caregivers to seniors as well as to their own children. People are on the brink around eviction from apartments or home foreclosure. So our kids are having to deal with that. And then, of course, the 4th pandemic is the coming environmental catastrophe. I use this fire photo because all of my grandchildren live in California. And in conversations with them this summer, they would say, well, yeah, I normally go work out, Grandma, I go to the track, I do this, I do that, but really couldn't do it because the quality of the air is so bad. Even though we're not right near the fire, it has an impact on us. For those of you who have family, friends, and loved ones in the Gulf Coast region, you know that this past summer was one of the worst storm seasons we've seen. More storms, more intense storms. So all 4 of those things are happening. And I think the inclination would be to kind of wring our hands and say, oh my gosh, we are doomed. But I want to suggest that these 4 pandemics provide us with an opportunity, at least as educators. And I take my cue from an Indian novelist by the name of Arundhati Roy. Roy says the following about pandemics. And that is that historically, pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and imagine their world anew. But this one is no different. It is a portal, a gateway. It's between one world and the next. We can choose to walk through it, dragging the carcasses of our prejudice and hatred, our avarice, our data banks and dead skies behind us, our dead ideas, our dead rivers and smoky skies behind us, or we can walk through lightly with little luggage, ready to imagine another world and ready to fight for it. So think about that. The idea that we could be imagining another world, that the pandemic in some ways is a full stop for us to do something very different. So what I keep saying to folks is let's not go back to normal. Let's engage in what I call an education reset. Because I think the pandemic provides an opportunity to move towards justice. Justice in education, things like assessment and access and community engagement, in dismantling the carceral state, looking at prison sentencing and policing, in economic level setting, things like student loan debt and minimum wage, in healthcare. I mean, the COVID care, they didn't ask you for a card or evidence of insurance or anything around this COVID. If you had COVID, we needed to take care of you. The same thing has happened with the vaccine. You just can get the vaccine. The pandemic has given us this opportunity to stop doing some of the stuff we have done in the past. And then it's also a time for what I would call a cultural reset. And so I've been really enamored of things like how many Black folks I know just fell in love with Hamilton just because what the cast looked like. And of course it came to us on, through our TV screens. We didn't have to pay a mortgage payment to go to a theater to see it. or Bridgerton, which just mixed up all the racial identities. And then I use this example of my sort of guilty pleasure during the pandemic, YouTube channel called Twins, the New Trend. And I'll talk a little bit about that in this next slide. What opportunities we have to reset the academy. A lot of times when we talk about reset in education, we're always talking PK-12. But this is an opportunity for the academy, colleges and universities, to break out of the disciplinary and epistemological silos. So fields like environmental studies and human biology and bioethics, they don't just live in one department. They cut across departments. And this is an important opportunity for us as educators to be pushing that. Begin to cross into institutional boundaries, the campus and community, and our discourse communities. It's an opportunity for us to rethink the funding model. I don't think the funding model we have is sustainable. And so we should be asking questions about what our international peers do to fund their colleges and universities. For the most part, their governments fund them. It's a time for us to rethink the reward system. Things like faculty service and advising and, quote, diversity work. Most people take on the diversity work on a campus, on a college campus, as extra work because they don't get credited for doing it. And rethinking the place of diversity in the academy. So if you have someone who is in charge of diversity on your campus, do they have to direct line reporting to the institutional head? Or do they have to go through several layers of bureaucracy to get an idea to the president or the chancellor or the provost? And also rethinking the instructional delivery systems. How we do the learning has got to change. This is true for PK-12 as well as our academy. You know, I think before this pandemic, we just thought those IT people were over there to fix our internet or to get our emails back when we switched over to Outlook. Now, I think we understand they need to be central to the teaching learning enterprise. Now, I'm not going to play this particular video just because my time is running out, but these are the twins from Twins, the New Trend. And I've become so enamored of these young people because they are showing a different enthusiasm towards learning that I said that any teacher had 2 kids in their classroom that was this exciting about learning something new, they would just, you know, you'd go home every day from work 5 feet off the ground because these 2 guys are so excited about what we think of as old music. This particular video is the first time they heard Boys to Men ever, which many of us will go, what? Yeah, they've got a whole catalog of songs. And I thought it was just me because I just loved them. And I you know, every day couldn't wait to see for them to release a new video. Well, it turns out President Obama loves them too. And there's at least one video where he's talking to them because they're going through his playlist. So this is what I mean about crossing these boundaries. We don't have to be locked into narrow and constricted ways of thinking about knowledge. I also want to talk about hip hop as an opportunity for justice, because I think if you really understand what hip hop is, it is the notion of flipping something out of nothing. And it's kind of what we've had to do in this pandemic. It's a notion of staying fresh. You can't keep doing the same old things. The classrooms and teachers who have struggled through this pandemic often are people who have tried to keep doing the same old stuff. It's the people who change things up. And it's also about being creatively resourceful. So I'm not just talking about that you know the top 20 hip hop songs. I'm suggesting that you've begun to do these 3 things. And you see some pictures here. One is a podcast that I actually was on called Hip Hop Can Save America. And for those of you who paid attention, that's DJ D Nice. He really got us through the early part of the pandemic, where there were parties, where there were people you wouldn't expect to be there. Michelle Obama was there. Bernie Sanders was there. I mean, all kinds of entertainers and public figures in a common space. And when you think of the importance of that kind of common space engagement for democracy, then you begin to understand it's not just about the music, it's about our understanding our common experience as Americans. So I'm going to wrap up with an example of what this might look like in the school. I'm just going to be a few minutes over my 30 minutes, so let's see how this works. This is a young man that I have had the opportunity to teach.
Neighborhoods are ovens with windows. And as the knob on global warming increases, lives are preheated until a soul souffles. Pancake stack projects are poured over with a humid as thick as molasses. Heat and humidity are the perfect appetizer on death's plate. It's an all-you-can-eat buffet from May to October, and senior citizen discount is every day. If thermometers can measure temperatures, they should be able to measure human anxiety. As the temperature rises, we reach boiling points. Attitudes of those around us rise quicker than mercury, and the pressure of staying cool causes us to explode. Compressed living complexes circulate heat and cause compressed feelings to converge upon our neighbors in the hood. So that 90% release of excess body heat talked about in science class is contributed to our local temperature rising. We crack open fire hydrants until we hear lights crying, raising taxes by lowering our body temperature. And if you couldn't afford a wind replacer, fridges and freezers were propped open until your two brothers' faces are frozen. Audiences applaud the ice cream man once that familiar jingle mingles with our ears. This sweet release of flooded heat is a godsend. But what do you know? The ice cream vendor's name is Noah. As the temperature rises, so do attitudes, death rates, bills, and ice cream stocks. Heat affects the elderly more than it does us. Their lungs resemble the Dow Exchange, rises and drops until they crash. Ambulances are summoned, riding down the street flooded with the contents of the only fire hydrant. And we have only just begun to fry.
So what you saw was an 18-year-old Elijah Furquan. I will tell you that Elijah is 27 years old. He has a degree from the University of Wisconsin in environmental studies, and he works as a climate scientist. On the weekend, he still does spoken word performance. We were able to take what he had to bring with him. He was enrolled in our very innovative First Wave Hip Hop Art Scholars program. Let him study at the university, earn a degree, perform, hone his craft. And for those of you who saw Miss Amanda Gorman at the inauguration, Amanda is someone that I had a chance to select at 18 as a part of the U.S. I'm on the panel that selects the U.S. National Nobel Youth Laureate, excuse me. I'm watching my time, so I'm feeling bad and I'm starting to go over a little bit. But I want to point out this point about Amanda and even Elijah, because I've said over and over, these people are not extraordinary. That's all I've heard. Oh, she's extraordinary. She's not extraordinary. She's outstanding and she's quite good. But I want to tell you, there are thousands of young people like that. When we wade through these submissions for the Youth National Poet Laureate, they're brilliant, all of them. And yet our children are treated like they're not. And we treat someone like Amanda or even an Elijah like they're an exception. They're not exceptional. But if we move towards justice, we will begin to see them as who they truly are. So I just want to thank you for your attention, and I hope I've left enough time. Let's see where think I'm actually not too bad. And okay.
Well, thank you for your remarks, Dr. Ladson-Billings. It's powerful sharing these examples from young people who should be the norm. They're brilliant, and nurturing them is our goal as educators. We'll hear a response a bit later, but first we have some time for a few questions for Dr. Ladson-Billings. And I'll facilitate that for you. The first question I have is from Jared Lancer. What are your thoughts on strategies for dismantling the Eurocentric literacy approaches as a profession, which not only fails African American students, but also the majority of all K-12 students in every student demographic, including whites in the United States?
So excellent question. And I'm actually not someone who doesn't think we should. I still think Shakespeare belongs in the canon. I think that Mark Twain belongs in the canon, but they need to be there alongside of some other stuff. We have this notion that our kids can only do one thing at a time. I'm someone who would still teach Conrad's Heart of Darkness, but I would teach it alongside Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart. So now we have a conversation about, well, what's going on here? Why is this person describing the continent in one way and this person in another way? What advantage does Achebe bring to it? That's the kind of thinking our students have to do to be able to be good decision makers. If I were teaching high schoolers and I had to teach Julius Caesar, I would pair it with some episodes of The Wire or Tony Soprano or even Power. You got to be selective because some of this stuff gets over the edge. It's not that the kids haven't seen it, but we have community standards. But this notion of blind ambition and inability to trust those closest to you, those are themes that run through the literature and through popular culture that kids can understand. So my sense is what you do is you don't, quote, dismantle as much as you break open the sort of Eurocentric curriculum and say, here's what it affords and here's what it doesn't. And here's some other things that help us raise important questions about it.
Thank you. As a social studies educator, I can connect to that in a very personal way. I have another question from Kristen DeVivra. How can we measure, analyze, and evaluate whether, as educators, we are succeeding at fostering an anti-racist classroom?
I'm not sure the term measure is the one that I might use. We are a society that's enamored with measurement. And the problem is we end up with one measure. And if you've only got one tool, the only tool you have is a hammer, then everything is a nail. And I just want to make sure that our levels of accountability are beyond just the limited notions of assessment that we now have. Now, I will tell you, because of this pandemic, and I've been in a lot of conversations as the National Academy president with folks who do assessment, folks from ETS, folks from the College Board, who are all saying, we don't know if we can go back to that same old way. I listened to a podcast the other day from This American Life that really talked about more and more colleges and universities are moving away from requiring ACT and SAT. Lots of schools doing test optional. I know we are not using the ACT in Wisconsin this year. I don't know if we'll continue to do that. Texas, when it went to its legal settlement of top 10%, has found that it hasn't hurt their student population. So even the top 10% of a poor high school has been able to, once they provide the necessary supports, once they're on campus, those kids have been able to thrive too. So I think it's not how can we assess, but what does assessment need to look like to really tell us something?
Yeah, that's important work yet to be done. We have a question from Lisa Bass. What is your definition of equity, and how does equity interplay with justice?
Equity is one of those words that I'm less enamored of these days. You know, I speak to a lot of people, a lot of conferences that call themselves DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it's, again, one of those places where I think the language is obscuring what needs to happen. And I think that as soon as people hear equity, some people gravitate towards it, and there's a whole group of people who shut completely off because they think they're going to lose something in the process. But justice is a fundamental principle. It's, you know, justice is written into our documents, you know, liberty and justice for all. 14th Amendment, equal justice under the law. So I want to try to pull us back to some foundational stuff and say, no, just give me justice. You know, that's what I want. I want a just society. I want us to live up to the ideals that we set out in the beginning. You know, the marvelous thing about living in America is no matter what we may have done, we set such a high bar for ourselves. You know, when people say to me, oh, well, you sound like you're bashing America. Not at all. I'm holding America to her standards. She should have never wrote that stuff down. You know, I was a social studies educator too, US history. I literally have a constitution in my backpack right now. I don't go anywhere without it. It's a marvelous document. So nothing in that document says equity, but it says justice. And I want to hold our feet to the fire around justice.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And I think something we can probably all agree on. Wayne Williams asked a question as well. Would you be willing to speak more about the idea of opportunity hoarding, how it takes place and its consequences?
Yeah, I mean, I think another way to think about opportunity hoarding is the rich get richer. In other words, people don't mind having AP classes as long as their children get into AP classes. They don't mind having sort of special programs, honors, and what have you, as long as their children get access to it. And we see it happening over and over again. So let me give you a pretty extreme example. Back in the 1970s, when California went to pass the sort of taxpayers' Bill of Rights, what was called Proposition 13, they essentially said, we're not paying any more of these property taxes, which meant that schools had to shut down lots of programs that they saw as somewhat elective. But I lived in Palo Alto. So my kids are in a community that is filled with resources. So all of the things that couldn't happen in a nearby community because it was a poorer community continued to happen. Palo Alto is one of the districts that started the first public school foundation. So now it's the school no longer buying, building the library, the foundation's building it because they have those resources. Or where other schools said, well, we can't have these art and music classes, we just can't afford it. The Palo Alto Foundation, which made up of parents, pool their resources and make sure their children still get those things. So opportunity hoarding really speaks to the notion that, again, the rich get richer, that even if the opportunity is out there for everyone, certain people grab it and hold on to it.
We have another question from Megan Lefevers that relates to this concept a little bit. She asked, what are your viewpoints on high rates of placement in exceptional children's programs?
By exceptional children, is she talking about, because the terminology is different everywhere, she means special needs?
Well, I think it might be gifted. I don't know.
Okay, gifted. Okay, because exceptionality can be on either end of the spectrum, right? Mm-hmm. Well, I literally asked my local superintendent this week to do something for me. I'm working with Madison around an early reading initiative. And I said to him, Dr. Jenkins, here's what I'd like you to do. cost out how much it would cost if we made taking and passing an advanced placement course a requirement for every single student to graduate. In other words, rather than saying, oh, let me recommend you for AP, or, you'd be a good AP candidate. What if we said everybody should take at least one AP class? And I'm not just saying any class, take an AP class in something you're interested in. If you're interested in music, there are music history classes, take that. I said, I want you to do that. And then I said, the other thing I'd like you to do is, if that's something we can't pull off, can't get enough teachers who are certified who can teach the AP, can you cost out what it would mean if you made as a requirement for graduating from a Madison Metropolitan High School that every student take at least one college level course? Same principle, not just anything, not English or history or calculus, if you're not interested in that. But, the University of Wisconsin has thousands of courses, and there should be something at an early level, whether it's in the arts, whether it's in the sciences, whether it's the social sciences or the humanities, that students should have access to. Like I said, I sent a paper to those students at Carrboro High School. Every last one of them read it. That's a paper that I distribute in a graduate class. And yeah, they struggled through it, but they did do it. And so it gave them a particular experience. I'm less concerned that people get a 4 or a 5 on an AP test than they get a good experience, having been in an enriched experience in, say, US history, if they have that interest. So those are the kinds of shifts and changes. When I talk about a reset, that's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about us going back to what we were doing, because what we were doing was ensuring that some kids were failing.
Thank you. I want to return to the concept of justice. And this is going to be our last question. We have a lot of questions. I think that's a tribute to how you've inspired us and provoked us to think. But this question comes from Owen Stone, and it's particularly relevant, I think, for us all. What mechanisms should be in place for universities to hold themselves accountable when they deny basic justice to students, faculty, and staff? How, too, do we effectively break open the injustices of the university system and place them in public view?
Excellent question. And I would say that universities that have an ombudsman program for faculty and staff need to extend that program to students. That you have someone that students can appeal to, because of the current system. Your appeal is often to the very person that is being unjust to you. You appeal to a faculty member that isn't treating you the right way, or you appeal to a dean who is supporting that faculty member. But if we can have an ombuds program, and it's actually something that I've really urged at the PK level for parents, because sometimes parents get into these dust-ups with folks because they don't have an advocate attached to the process. And so without having someone who understands the system, who says, here are your rights, here's what you should be able to do. I think similarly, universities should have some responsibility, and particularly state universities. I've been on this soapbox about the lack of state support for its own institutions. Over my 27 years at Wisconsin, I've seen the state contribution to our budget steadily go down. When I first got there and saw what the state contributed, I used to say, the University of Wisconsin is a state-assisted university. It's not a state university, it's state-assisted. But as I watched that number shrink, the proportion of dollars go down, 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 I now refer to the University of Wisconsin as a state-located university. I studied geography. I'm absolutely positively sure that university is in that state. And that's about it. I can say nothing about what the state does to support it. So I think in our state institutions in particular, there needs to be some level of recourse as well as transparency. And I think we have an opportunity in this sort of pandemic moment to rethink what we mean by campus community partnerships. And I think we should take advantage of it.
Absolutely. I think we can all get behind that. That's all the time we have for questions. Thank you very much, Dr. Ladson-Billings.
My pleasure.
There is one final person I'd like to introduce, Dr. Joy Gaston-Gales, who will provide a response and issue a call to action based on Dr. Ladson-Billings' talk. Dr. Gales is president-elect of the Association for the Study of Higher Education, a professor of higher education, university faculty scholar, and our college's senior advisor for advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion. As senior advisor, she leads our college's Change Agent Group to become an anti-racist college. Dr. Gales?
Thank you, Dr. Lee, for that kind introduction. And I am just so filled with so many emotions. I was sitting over there crying, thinking about my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Lee, and wishing that I had a personal opportunity to interact with Don C. Locke. And and then listening to you, Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings, and your powerful call to action is just really inspired me on a personal level. And so I've cried over there, I've tweeted, I've taken notes like I'm in class, and I just want to say thank you. And I hope that everyone at home or wherever you are just giving you a warm round of applause and snaps and whatever other accolade that you deem necessary. And so thank you again for being here this afternoon. I'm so glad you're here for this year's Don C. Locke Symposium for Multiculturalism and Social Justice with our, again, dynamic keynote speaker, affectionately known as Dr. GLB, Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings. And so I just want to say again, what an inspiring message from one of the giants in education. And I remember reading your book, Dr. GLB, when I was a graduate student. I read Dream Keepers as a part of a class that I was taking. And I have been inspired. I was inspired then, and I am inspired now. And I continue to be inspired by your commitment to justice in education. So for me, your work really reminds us of the importance of meeting students where they are and realizing that every child should see themselves and their culture reflected in educational environments. And that indeed is a part of our call to action. Again, my name is Joy Gaston-Gales, and I do have the pleasure of serving as professor and senior advisor for advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion. So for me, this is an incredibly important role within our college that came about as a part of Dean Danowitz's call to action that was issued this past summer in response to the unjust murders of Black and brown bodies across the country, senseless murders that continue to plague and haunt our nation even today. So this call to action for us to become an anti-racist college of education is important, and the time has always been, and it is especially now. So becoming an anti-racist college of education means that as a college, we recognize that racism permeates all aspects of society, including education. It's embedded in policies and practices that have been normalized over time. And so in becoming an anti-racist college of education, our intention is to continuously do the work that's necessary to challenge policies, practice, ideologies that are rooted in systemic inequities that disenfranchise populations and people who find themselves on the margins of society. This work can't just be done by some of us. It's going to require that all of us work together to answer this important call. So throughout this academic year, we have been in conversation as a college community. We have been in conversations much like this one we're having today, alongside leaders in education who have rigorously studied important issues to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion that help inform the work that we do and will continue to do. Becoming an anti-racist college of education isn't a place where we will probably ever really arrive, but it represents a continuous, never-ending commitment to advance diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. I'm adding that word. We need to get back to the basics. And I am with you, Dr. Giobi, in holding this country accountable to what it promised, right? And so we must continue to be committed to this work, and it's probably going to be over the course of all of our lifetimes. And so as a part of this work, Dean Danovitz put together a task force for which I, again, have the honor and privilege to serve as chair. Over the past year, we have been in conversation as a team, talking about and defining what it means to be an anti-racist college of education. And part of that definition, if not all of it, is informed and underscored by the remarks that we heard today from Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings. We've also invited you, the College of Education community, to be a part of that conversation. And I hope that you took the opportunity to sign up for one of the working groups where you have expertise and interest. Over the next several weeks, we will engage in conversations about the strengths, the weaknesses, where we have opportunities to know better and to do better in the name of advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion. And those of you who know I got that from Maya Angelou. So I'm excited about this work, and I'm excited about what we heard in today's symposium and what it stands for and what it represents. And, you know, I know that a fire has been lit in me today, and I hope one has been lit in you too. And so thank you again for joining us. Thank you again so much, Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings, for inspiring us through your words of wisdom and your call for action. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gales. And thank you for the call to action. Our work to become an anti-racist college of education is justice work. I'm committed to it. We're all committed to it. And we will work day and night to accomplish that as our goal. Thank you to all of our speakers that you've heard from, either live or through video, who helped make this symposium possible. To our attendees, I hope you found the remarks as thought-provoking, as motivating, as encouraging as I have. The call to justice, to act, is powerful. Thank you for joining us. Have a good evening, and I'd like for you to all join us in a final recognition of those who made this event possible with this final video.
Hello, it's Marjorie Locke again with one more important message. First, thank you so much for being here. I know my husband would be pleased and honored that so many of you joined us for this symposium. My hope from what you have heard today is that you will feel even more committed to working toward racial and social equity and be reminded that you are not in this work alone. I want to thank all the donors who have supported this symposium and helped make it possible. It means so much that you believe in the work that my husband spent his life championing. You can help us continue this symposium well into the future by making a gift to the College of Education's Excellence Fund. And if you make a gift right now, you will be helping our college reach an important goal. Because today is NC State's Day of Giving, any gift you make today will be increased in impact and go even further. In fact, if the College of Education receives at least 200 gifts today, an anonymous donor has pledged to the college $20,000 to provide scholarships to support students committed to advancing equity and diversity, just like Brittany Wake, who you met earlier today. Any gift you make today will go to supporting both this symposium as well as providing much needed scholarships to other deserving students. You will be helping us advance much needed equity initiatives. Please consider making a gift. Just go to ncstatedayofgiving.com. Thank you very much for your support, and thank you again for attending today's symposium. Have a wonderful evening.